Okay, well, I'd like to welcome everybody. Today, we're going to talk about how to treat Parkinson's disease naturally and also how to prevent it. Uh, Parkinson's is a very common and important neurologic disease, one of many illnesses that affect what in medicine we used to call the black box of the brain. We have about 1 million Americans currently living with Parkinson's disease, and every year we have 60,000 new cases that are being diagnosed. So this is an area that's not a minor problem. This is a major issue for a lot of people. Now, how do you tell? First of all, Parkinson's is a progressive disease of the nervous system. So it starts with earlier signs, simple things such as loss of smell, difficulty with mood swings, poor sleep. But the main hallmark of the disease is loss of fluidity in movement. Normally, we can move our arms pretty fluidly back and forth, but when you get this kind of cogwheel motion where it just loses the fluidity, people start walking stiffly, writing stiffly, that's an early sign. Over time, people start to develop tremors, stooped posture, muscle rigidity, and a mask-like facial expression. Less talked about, but equally important, would be things such as depression, fatigue, and especially dementia. Unfortunately, Parkinson's disease is an all too common cause of dementia and often is misdiagnosed as Alzheimer's. So let's take a look at what causes this illness. There's an area of the brain that is especially responsible for helping fluid movement and for making dopamine, called the substantia nigra. In a small percent of people, the Parkinson's disease is associated with genetics. But you'll find that for most people, we don't even know what happens and why these neurons or brain cells are dying. I suspect that it's most likely a combination of factors that affects neurons that make the neurotransmitter called dopamine. So, for example, it could very well be toxic. We have over 85,000 chemicals in the environment that weren't there a couple hundred years ago. In my own personal suspicion, a key role is the role of iron. Iron is critical for making dopamine. It's one of the reasons that the substantia nigra, which means the dark area, is so dark. It's from the iron, although that's just one of the issues. But iron is critical for dopamine production. And iron, if you think about it, rusts things. It's like things that get oxidized are rusted. And the antioxidants are critical for your body to be able to use iron safely without rusting or oxidizing the cells that are using them. So I think a combination of factors, a mix of genetics, toxin exposure, and a host of other things are contributing to the illness. We have a lot to learn there, but fortunately, there is a lot of room for growth, and there will be a lot of advancement in natural medicine, and there has been. But let's take a look at standard medical treatment, though. Unfortunately, when it comes to Parkinson's disease, there's been very little advancement in standard medical treatment. Now, think back to 1967. That's when the Pontiac Firebird came out. The board game Battleship, that was before they had on the iPhone. Elvis Presley's movie Double Trouble. And levodopa was used for Parkinson's. It is still the gold standard treatment for Parkinson's disease. Basically, there's been very little advancement in the last 40-some years. Now, when you take a look at treatment, currently there's no cure for Parkinson's disease, but the main thing that we give medically will basically be the levodopa. Unfortunately, the effects of levodopa wear off after about 2 years. Basically, the medication will often stop working. And the medication also does have side effects. So as Parkinson's advances, they may start to use other medications. But if the medications can't control the symptoms, they're starting to do basically brain implants with brain stimulation. Think of it similar as having a pacemaker for the heart. But again, it doesn't stop or slow the disease. What's important to do in Parkinson's, as with most severe illnesses, there's key take-home message number one. People do best if you use all the tools in the toolkit. So medicine has only a hammer. It has basically L-DOPA, and it has the surgical approaches. They will use a couple other things such as anticholinergics, Simitril or Amantadine. We recommend staying away from Mayo inhibitors. And then they'll teach you things to basically cope with the disease. But that's about it. But if you go ahead and combine the best of natural and standard medicine, that's when you can see remarkable improvements in people. So it's very important to remember, go ahead, use what the doctor is recommending, and then get the other tools in the toolkit. And we're going to talk about those other tools today. Many of these are things that you can apply and offer on your own. So let's take a look at the progression of Parkinson's disease. This is not an all or nothing thing. It starts gradually. And when you get 80% of the neurons that have been damaged or destroyed, that's when you start to see the very, very severe forms of the Parkinson's disease settling in. So you want to do things to protect those neurons. You'd be amazed at how resilient these cells can be if given the tools that they need. And here are 3 remarkably powerful tools to have in your toolkit for both slowing and potentially reversing some of the effects of Parkinson's disease. These are highly absorbed curcumins, glutathione, and coenzyme Q10. So, very important again, what you're going to find is that you want to use tools that have the ability to get across the protective layer of the brain called the blood-brain barrier. And these are things that will do that. So basically, we're going to talk about how to prevent or slow oxidative stress and inflammation in this illness naturally. Let's begin with one of my favorites, which is curcumin. I consider curcumin to be the most important new development in herbal medicine over the last 10 to 20 years. It has been striking in terms of its effects. So let's take a look at some examples of the research and the power of curcumin when it comes to neurodegenerative brain diseases. A very striking thing that first caught my attention was that India has the lowest rate of Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease in the world. Most people don't know this, but there is 70% less Alzheimer's in India, and that's a remarkable number. And the reason this happens is can trace down and back to the curcumin. And curcumin is a yellow spice that's found in turmeric, which is basically what curries are made out of. I remember when I was in India, in the grocery store, they had over 30 barrels of different kinds of curcumin and turmeric. And you can tell them by the bright yellow color. The yellow basically in large part comes from the curcumin. And the curcumin has been shown to cross into the brain. Basically, this is likely the major cause for lower rates of Alzheimer's. And let's take a look at why this may be so. There's an enormous amount of research going on looking at curcumin in a host of illnesses. And this is part of what excites me so much. But let's take a look at what happens when you have chemical damage going on to the brain from any of a host of different things that can injure brain cells. And in these animal studies, what they would do is go ahead and give the curcumin along with it. So fluoride, for example, is known to cause oxidative stress in the brain and cause cellular damage and loss of brain cells. So in this study, mice were given fluoride or fluoride plus curcumin. And they measured a compound called MDA, which is a known marker of how severely stressed or oxidatively stressed the area is. And when you take a look at it, in the control group, the blue box, you'll see the normal level of oxidative stress in the brain. You add fluoride, and that almost triples. When you add the curcumin to the fluoride, you bring it way down. And again, curcumin by itself, you'll see that there is really no change. So it basically is kind of having troops in the background that wait until they are needed. But when they are needed, superpowers, really good word for it. Now, if you take a look at other research on toxins as well, this study, which is the same study we talked about earlier, looked at the ability to go ahead and have curcumin protect the cells by how many cells survived, basically. They did a body count in terms of the effect of the fluoride. And you'll see in the control group, you'll see about 75 viable neurons per field that they looked at. And after the fluoride, that dropped down to about 25. Again, about 2/3 of the cells died. But if you went ahead and added their curcumin, you saw only about 1/3 of the cells died. And remember, there's that 80% threshold that until you lose 80% of the cells, you're going to be doing okay. So to prevent over half of the cell death that's going on is incredibly dramatic. That offers very powerful protection for you and your loved ones. So if you take a look again, another way of looking at it, you'll see when you're giving the compound MPTP, you'll see that you drop the levels, the cell levels, by over half. And so again, you're seeing with multiple different things that can kill the brain cells, that the curcumin is dramatically protective. So this isn't just a fluoride thing, but many things. Now, and another important thing, so what happens if the cells are dead? In medical school, we used to be taught that neurons never regenerate. When they're dead, they're dead. And it turns out that's just not so. You can stimulate new neuron production. And in fact, this study went ahead and looked at the cells that stimulate formation of new brain cells, or what's called cell proliferation. So when they gave the curcumin, you see this dramatic increase in proliferation, an increase of almost 3-fold. So again, major protection for the brain, but also increases the ability to form new brain cells. Now, so we've looked at the animal studies. It's protective, it helps healing, but what happens in terms of function? So maybe they make cells that don't work. Maybe the injured cells are alive, but they're not functioning. That's not the case. And this, again, another animal model where they went ahead and they took a disease like Parkinson's disease in the animal model, and they gave it the curcumin. And basically, the red bar shows how the markedly decreased motor function in the animals who had Parkinson's disease compared to the blue, healthy animals. Now take a look at the yellow bar. When they gave these animals with essentially Parkinson's disease the curcumin, their ability to function, to walk, to basically run on a little circle kind of a thing, went back almost to normal. This is a remarkable change and remarkable improvement. Basically, the curcumin almost entirely prevented the decrease in motor function. So when you take a look, curcumin is very important as an antioxidant, as an anti-inflammatory, for brain protection, and for growing new brain cells. So this, for me, is a critical place to begin in helping those with Parkinson's disease. So we've looked at curcumin, and again, it's very important that it be a highly absorbed curcumin. Otherwise, unless you're eating an Indian diet, it's going to be difficult to get enough. So you want one that's highly absorbed. Step 2 for protecting the brain in Parkinson's disease will be the antioxidant glutathione. Glutathione is one of, and in my worldview, the most critical antioxidant in the human body. If you think about it, you'll see all of these different products that are being sold to help raise antioxidant levels, basically by giving blueberry oxidants, raspberry oxidants, and all these different plant antioxidants. Now, that shows how important antioxidants are in nature. But think about it. Wouldn't the most important antioxidants for people be the ones that people make? And we're not talking about eating people to get them, but it's very simple to get them. The 2 antioxidants that we make are superoxide dismutase, for which you need zinc and just a little bit of copper, and glutathione. Those are the 2. Those are the human antioxidants. Those are the ones most critical for healthy function in the human body. And there are countless illnesses that have been associated with inadequate glutathione when our bodies undergo oxidative stress. Again, Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's disease, a host of neurodegenerative diseases. The brain, because of its high lipid levels, is one of the most sensitive areas to oxidation in the body. So you'll see that this list is studded with major neurologic disorders. Also for cancer, for the immune system to be able to protect you, it has to go ahead and pour hydrogen peroxide over invaders. But to keep from burning itself at the same time, it needs antioxidants. So you'll see many infections, cancers, autoimmune diseases, a host of things. And as you take a look at the list, you'll see that it goes on and on and on. Heart disease, stroke, erectile dysfunction, hypertension, all of these things are linked to the inadequate levels of the most important human antioxidant, which is glutathione.
Excuse me, Dr. Teitelbaum. This is Cheryl, and I'm interrupting for a moment because we have some folks who are having some audio difficulties, and there seems to be a problem with the media viewer, which is a little icon in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. So attendees, if you're hearing a double audio feed, if you're hearing a video running in the background, which happened to me as well, if you click on the media viewer up in the upper right-hand corner of your screen, it will collapse and the sound will go away, because we've had a few folks saying that they can't hear what you're saying because there's another feed that's playing over it. So hopefully this will rectify the problem.
Will this correct it now? I've clicked on media viewer. And can you hear me now? Is it okay?
No, not you. I want them to click on their media viewer because they're getting a video. They're getting a video that's playing over you. So click on the media viewer, that shuts it down, and they'll be able to hear you. All right. So I'm going to mute my phone now, and folks, if this doesn't work for you, continue to send us questions either in the, let's see, I'll check the Q&A box to see if folks are able to, if that's working for them. All right, so it said I've got a couple that said that took care of the problem.
Good. So let me go ahead then and summarize the key things that we're saying. So basically, Parkinson's disease is a neurologic disorder of the cells that produce dopamine, and these are necessary for normal function. There are many causes, and iron, which is very oxidative, is both critical for making dopamine, but also requires protection against to prevent damage to the cells. To protect the cells, a number of studies are showing that curcumin is protective against toxic chemicals and its effect on the brain cells, and also helps you to grow new brain cells to help replace the dead ones. It helps with neuroproliferation. So, and the curcumin needs to be a very highly absorbed one. So that pretty much, for those who had the echo, will bring up to speed. Now, what are other things that you can do to protect the brain cells? Well, oxidative stress, especially since these cells need to work with iron, which is like one of the biggest things that rust things. So you want antioxidants, so it's like anti-rusting things. Glutathione is the major human antioxidant. This is the most important antioxidant in the body. And it has multiple ways that it protects these very energetically active cells from any harm and death. So we find that glutathione levels are very decreased in people with Parkinson's disease. Usually in medicine, if something is decreased by 5 to 10%, that's considered a lot. For example, think of what a 10% pay cut would be like in terms of your family budget. Now, what happens when you get a 40% reduction in the active or reduced glutathione levels in people with Parkinson's disease? Well, you get Parkinson's disease. So the glutathione comes in two forms. It's like a battery, that's a rechargeable battery. When it's ready to work, it's in the reduced form. And then it gets oxidized into the inactive. It's like an empty, dead battery. So you want to keep it in that reduced form of glutathione because that's the one that works. Otherwise, the other form is just not really effective. So let's take a look at the studies of what happens when you give glutathione. A number of the videos that you were watching when we first started showed an example of the power of glutathione in Parkinson's disease. And this is work by Dr. David Perlmutter, brilliant neurologist. And we'll take a look at that video in a moment. But when they gave the glutathione, the degree of improvement, people had a 42% improvement in function, including tremor, speech, rigidity, by giving the glutathione 600 milligrams or versus giving the levodopa. Basically, it had the same effect as the levodopa, but with two critical differences. One, no side effects. Two, where the levodopa wears off in terms of after a number of years it stops working, the glutathione will continue to work and help long term. And the interesting thing is that the benefit of that intravenous treatment continued for even 4 months after the IV was given. So you gave the IV and you had long-lasting results. So I think that, you know, if a picture is worth 1,000 words, this video is worth 1,000,000. Here's a simple example. This is Dr. Perlmutter in the background, working with one of his folks with Parkinson's disease. This is the person before and then 30 minutes after getting a dose of intravenous glutathione. Lexi? Okay, so while we're waiting for the video to come up, Lexi, have you been able to get it to show? So what you're seeing is this gentleman who has severe Parkinson's disease, and where they're demonstrating how difficult it is for him to walk. He has rigidity difficulty even standing up. And then what happened is they basically gave him intravenous glutathione, 600 milligrams. In this case, it was 3,000 milligrams, and the study was 600 milligrams twice a day. So here's a single dose of 3,000 milligrams of glutathione, and you can see that he's now cruising around pretty happily. And where before he had to almost hold the walls occasionally to keep from falling, and he took short shuffling gaits, now he's cruising along. He's looking pretty close to being a healthy person of his age. So it's funny, with the other videos, there was a case, Dr. Perlmutter dropped a set of keys, and the person had less of a chance of picking them up than he did of flying to the moon. And after the IV glutathione, he just bent over like nothing, picked up the keys, gave them back to Dr. Perlmutter. So again, the effect is amazingly dramatic. For those of you with the holistic physicians that are working with you, in this video, again, they gave 3,000 milligrams of glutathione intravenously, which can be done in the office. I would give it with IV magnesium. In the study, they gave 600 milligrams twice a day for 30 days, and then followed the person for 4 months. So you'll see that even the IV glutathione may arguably be one of the most effective treatments available, standard or otherwise, for helping people with Parkinson's disease. And then the thing is that you can also find glutathione now in ways that are sublingual. It's important to do it in the correct form so that it gets absorbed properly and that it stays reduced. But there are ways to get the antioxidant both intravenously and by mouth. And for anybody with Parkinson's disease, this is something that I certainly would be using in my practice. Now, let's take a look at a third energy nutrient that also is an antioxidant. Basically, coenzyme Q10, critical in the production of energy in the body's mitochondria or energy furnaces, and it's an important antioxidant in its own right. It's been shown to be helpful in treating many conditions. Double-blind studies have shown that it helps in Parkinson's disease, but also can help cancer and heart disease and people with heart failure. It markedly improves cardiac output and function. We find in fibromyalgia that many people find it to be very helpful. A host of neurodegenerative diseases, migraines, fatigue, asthma. So again, coenzyme Q10, very important antioxidant. And once again, because of the oxidative stress that these folks are facing, possibly because, again, dopamine requires iron for its production, we're seeing that the levels of the coenzyme Q10 are reduced by about a third. And again, this is a very dramatic drop in the body when you lose 1/3 of something. And the coenzyme Q10 is important for protecting against damage to brain cells and the death of brain cells. So, for example, using a nasty toxin called paraquat, the coenzyme Q10 was found to go ahead and prevent over half of the damage, preserving about 20% of the neurons from premature death. So you'll see, again, where you start with 100% of neurons being healthy, you lose 40% of those with this toxin, but you save half of those cells. Remember that number we gave, 80% of the affected neurons need to be damaged to really get the problem of the Parkinson's acting severely. There's a lot of redundancy in the brain where we have built-in extra reserve. So protecting half of those cells from death and damage, major, major, major effect. And when you take a look, it also helped reduce the symptoms of Parkinson's disease. They look at people with Parkinson's who are treating with levodopa and who found that their medications effect was starting to wear off. It just, the levodopa was just stopping and it's being effective. They found that looking at what's called a Unified Parkinson's Disease Rating Scale, which is a common scale used, they were doing much better. Their behavior, their activities, ability to swallow, walk, eat, dress, all of those kind of things were improved. And again, you want to do this early in the disease. You want to do it late in the disease. You want to catch the person all along the way, protecting them from oxidative stress and helping those neurons not be damaged and to recover from damage. A good dose, 300 milligrams of ubiquinol daily. Again, for using the standard coenzyme Q10, they tend to use much higher levels. So again, ubiquinol is a good way to go in this disease. Ubiquinol has improved absorption overall, but when taking coenzyme Q10 in pretty much any form, I recommend that people take it with an oily meal. It doesn't have to be a lot. You can even take it with something like vitamin E, in which case use an all-natural mixed testosterone, or with a little bit of milk, not skim milk, but regular milk or butter, or just anything with a little bit of fat in it to get absorption. So we've taken a look at the role of curcumin, which is amazing. We've taken a look at the role of glutathione, which is remarkable as well, the role of coenzyme Q10. If you had studies like these for a medication, they would be charging you, I'm not kidding, $20,000 to $40,000 a year for that medication, even if it costs them nothing to make. And your doctor, I guarantee you, would hear about it, because they would be spending $70 million per year advertising their medication. But being natural, your doctors will not have heard about this research. That's why you get to find out about it on your own. So let's take a look at some additional things that can be helpful. Vitamin D is arguably the most important vitamin. You know, some people tease that Linus Pauling, who was the researcher for vitamin C, that he was close, he just missed it by one letter, that the vitamin D deficiency is a major issue. And one of the major reasons for that is this insane advice to avoid sunshine. Sunshine is critical for health. Every mother knows that, and they say, go out and play, honey, get some sunshine and fresh air. It's a common sense. But because there is concern about melanoma, which is usually not caused by the sunshine, it's a skin cancer that's going up in rates because of the immune dysfunction present in our society from many causes. Most melanomas are not in sun-exposed areas. But nonetheless, despite the research showing that avoiding sunshine contributes to thousands of cancer deaths, we're telling people avoid sunshine and near dip themselves in suntan lotion. When I was a kid, my parents took me to a museum of natural history, and I saw the skull with a hole cut out, and it said, oh yes, Aztec medicine men used to cut out holes to let out the evil spirits. And I was like 6 years old, and I looked at my mom and I said, really? And she said, I guess, and I can just picture, 30 years from now, they'll have the Hall of Medical Insanity, the Medical Hall of Shame, and they'll have all kind of things like don't breastfeed, and doctors telling people smoke cigarettes, and they'll have a booth with the doctor saying avoid sunshine. I can picture some little kid tugging his mom's dress saying, Mom, were they crazy? And the mother going, yes, dear. So here's the proper advice when it comes to sunshine. Avoid sunburn, not sunshine. So if you take a look, people with Parkinson's disease have much lower levels of vitamin D. And vitamin D is critical for immune dysfunction. So you really want to make sure the person gets sunshine, or at least that they're getting a multivitamin that has 1,000 to 5,000 units of vitamin D. I would probably go with the 2,000 to 5,000 units a day for most of the neurologic disorders such as MS, Parkinson's, and similar illnesses. Another interesting nutrient is another energy compound. It's part of what makes energy in our body. It's called NADH. This was researched by Dr. Birkmeyer looking at Parkinson's disease. And he was finding that people who received NADH, and it's done by mouth, it should be sublingual. Swallowed, it's going to tend to be destroyed by stomach acid, but they have sublingual tablets, 20 milligrams, once or twice a day. that, again, not a major thing, but certainly a worthwhile thing to consider. Higher mineral intake is associated with lower risk of Parkinson's disease. It's funny, but I routinely find even in those who have the Parkinson's coming not from the normal areas, but areas of the brain above that, we tend to see low iron levels. And I don't like to overdo iron because it's oxidative, but the research is showing that if you have higher levels and intakes of iron, magnesium, and zinc, you're going to have less risk of Parkinson's disease. It's the people with the lower intakes of these three minerals that have the higher risk of getting the Alzheimer's disease. So what they found was that in the top fourth of the population for getting these minerals, their risk of getting Parkinson's disease was dropped by 76% for those getting enough iron. Their risk of magnesium dropped by about 67%, and their risk, if they got enough zinc, was dropped by 50% compared to those in the lowest quarter of the population. So these are pretty markedly protective and for very low cost. Very simple things. Again, more is not better. I would check iron levels to make sure the iron is not high before taking it, and it's called a ferritin blood test. Magnesium, for everybody in the country who does not have kidney failure, I recommend 200 to 400 milligrams a day of a good absorbed magnesium. And for zinc, 15 to 25 milligrams a day is optimal for intakes. Now, also a common problem with the muscle shortening spasm or decreased function is bladder dysfunction. And you'll find two very helpful things to decrease the urine incontinence. One would be Angelica, a wonderful herb for anybody with urinary urgency or incontinence. So if you're one of those that when somebody tells a joke that you laugh so hard that the tears run down your leg, Angelica is a really good herb for that. Magnesium for those with urinary urgency, Angelica, and magnesium. So the Angelica, very benign, very simple, and the magnesium, both of those very good for people with Parkinson's disease. So you'll see that the effect was quite strong. You'll see that the urinary frequency dropped by about 2/3. You'll see, if you look at the numbers, marked improvement. So here's kind of a summary of what you need to do. You have a family member, if you have Parkinson's yourself, or you're helping people with this illness in general. Number one, you want to get curcumin, not turmeric. You would have to take about 50 pills of turmeric, pure turmeric, to get what's in one pill of the curcumin, because most turmerics are less than 2% curcumin. So if you're taking, if it says pure turmeric, well, buy 5 bottles, take them each day. It's just, you can't get enough in you to see the clinical effect unless you're just putting it all in a curry and cooking and eating that 3 meals a day. So you want to get basically a curcumin. You want one that's highly absorbed. And I would recommend the 750 milligram dosing per capsule that you can get. And then, because you want to get the proper amount, and I would recommend of the 750s to take one of those or 2 of those twice a day. For active glutathione, you want one that's absorbed under the tongue. Most of the ones that are swallowed are going to be destroyed or oxidized. The studies show that most glutathione swallowed by mouth gets broken down to its component parts, and then it's done. This way, you get one that's under the tongue. It goes straight into the blood. It doesn't go to the stomach acid and get destroyed. So IV injection is very good, but it's pretty pricey and difficult to get those all the time. I would go with a sublingual, and then it doesn't hurt to also add the IV injections. Your standard doctor will not generally be open or willing to do the IV glutathione. It's not part of the toolkit they're trained in, so find a holistic doctor. If you're wondering how to find a holistic doctor, get a piece of paper and a pen. The website, www.ab, that's B like Bob, IHM like Mary.org, not .com. So www.abihm.org will give you a list of over 2,000 holistic board-certified practitioners around the country. In addition, if you look up the American Academy of Naturopath Medicine, you'll find another several thousand practitioners. So again, you don't go to your chiropractor for heart bypass surgery, and I wouldn't bother trying with your regular family doctor or neurologist unless they're very open-minded and willing to look at the scientific research. Sadly, unless it's delivered by the pharmaceutical industry, most won't. Ubiquinol and not ubiquinone. Again, the form of coenzyme Q10 can matter. The ubiquinol is better absorbed, and that's why in studies, especially if there's any absorption problems, they'll tend to give that instead of the ubiquinone. So using the active coenzyme Q10 or ubiquinol for Parkinson's disease is a good choice. So here's the recipe. Write this down. This is the thing to go with. So a curcumin that's highly absorbed. Again, I would go probably with a 750 milligram dose personally, once or twice daily. I would consider even higher dosing than that, but it's not unreasonable to simply give the 500 milligrams once or twice a day as well. This is a case, though, where more might be better. I don't think we've hit the final threshold effect. Glutathione, I would take 150 milligrams sublingual tablet twice a day, morning and night. The ubiquinol, 300 milligrams daily. Vitamin D, 5,000 units daily. NADH, 20 milligram, one tablet under the tongue daily. And for the bladder support, the Angelica, 200 milligrams a day, and magnesium, 200 milligrams daily. This regimen, I think, can be very, 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 very helpful for the folks with Parkinson's disease, and it plays well with the medications that they will be taking, and I think it is very highly recommended. So I want to thank all of you for joining us today, and I'm happy to go ahead and take any questions that folks may have. Lexi, Cheryl, back to you.
Well, thank you so much, and I appreciate everyone who attended today. Thank you, Dr. Teitelbaum, for giving all this wonderful information on Parkinson's disease and natural supplements that have been clinically studied to show a real difference. I apologize to folks. There were a lot of technical difficulties on this call. There was, from somewhere, maybe it was beamed from outer space, but there was a video running, and somehow that video started to interfere with the ability of individuals to hear the lecture. Now, some folks didn't hear it at all, and some folks it was so bad they had to exit, and they're planning on listening to the rebroadcast. So rest assured, this will be uploaded onto the Terry Talks Nutrition website, and you will be able to listen to the archive version without the video interference. So I apologize to all of those who had those difficulties. I am as flummoxed as you may be. I have not been able to figure out where it's coming from or why it's causing such difficulties. We do have a lot of questions that have come in our Q&A box, so let's get started with some of those. I think some folks were confused. One of the questions was, you had said 750, and then then the protocol said 500. They were wondering the 750, and then the 500 is the standardization of the curcuminoids, correct? So it's not 500 milligrams of curcumin. It's something that's standardized to 500 milligrams of curcuminoids, which are the active compounds in curcumin. That was one of our questions. Yes?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, and then we have...
But I'm also going to note that, Cheryl, for this area, for what the research I've seen looking at the curcumins and phenolics, we haven't hit the top of the dose curve. In other words, they look at a dose, but when they go to higher dose, they see even more effect. So I think the 500 is a reasonable dose. That's the reason I added in the higher dose, is because it's not unreasonable to also consider the higher dosing.
All right. Here's a question that regarding, would every person with Parkinson's disease take all of these nutrients, or
I
do
would.
you judge? Oh, okay. Then I won't even ask it. Or do you judge it on a case-by-case basis? Yes.
Well, let's look at it this way. All of these things combined are not very expensive. They're very benign, and instead of side effects, you get side benefits. Compared to having somebody implant a pacemaker deep inside your brain. When you weigh them, and these are things that have a preventive effect as well as helping with function. So to the degree that you can prevent the toxicity, the progression of the disease using these incredibly simple measures, I would be doing all of them if this was me or a loved one of mine. Absolutely, why not?
So there's no danger in using them all at the same time?
Just danger of staying healthier.
All right. Another question we have, are there any benefits to using melatonin in Parkinson's disease?
I don't know. It helps sleep like it will in anybody else. It does have some antioxidant effect, but I haven't seen any research with it. Main downside risks with the prolactin, I don't think would be a problem here. So if the person has trouble sleeping, I would. The standard dose for sleep is 1.5 milligram. One can make an argument for using the higher doses, looking for the antioxidative effect. But the real accurate answer, beyond all that speculation, is don't know.
We have another question asking about using glutathione intravenously versus taking it sublingually. Is there any comparison, contrast about how effective the oral dosage is compared to the IV?
No, the IV is going to be more effective. The problem is some doctors are charging $150 to $900. I think the latter is absurd, but they're charging that for giving each IV dose. And then you have to get the person to the office, and you can't, it's one thing in a study to give it twice a day for a month, and I think it's perfectly reasonable to do that even in real life as kind of a one-shot thing, but it's not sustainable. So what we find often, same thing with magnesium, same with high-dose vitamin C, with a host of things that we give, is you want to go with the IVs when they're available to jumpstart the system and get the really high dosing into the body that you can't get by mouth. But then you want to use the oral forms, and again, you want to use forms that get absorbed and stay reduced, or you're wasting your time, to help maintain the benefit. So in terms of cost, I think in my practice, I would do both, using the IVs to help set improvements in place. And while on the IV, they'd still be taking the oral, and then I would leave them on the oral, adding in an IV booster when needed. And in terms of simplicity, overall effectiveness, and bang for the buck, to me, that's the best way to handle it for folks.
Here's a person who wonders if these protocols would also be effective for someone working with a diagnosis of ALS or some other related motor neuron disease.
Well, they haven't, because these things are less common, they haven't been studied as much. So the answer is we don't have the research to know. But from a theoretical point of view, I would suspect that many of them would be. I think the curcumin and glutathione and coenzyme Q10 and the vitamin D are all generally neuroprotective in immune diseases, which these basically tend to fall under, and in toxin diseases. So where for things like the ALS, I would add in things along the lines of lithium, 5 to 10 milligrams a day. And again, people get all spooked with lithium because they overdose people who are bipolar or incorrectly diagnosed with bipolar often, and they throw lithium at them, and it causes a lot of side effects. Well, they're giving basically 30 to 90 milligrams of lithium a day. The normal diet has 3 milligrams, and the studies show that where you have higher levels of lithium intake, you have less brain damage, basically, and then you have better mood, less violent crime. It's funny, in West Texas, there's one area that has very high lithium levels in the water and very low violent crime rates. So I think in the ALS kind of things, and in the ALS I would do chelation looking for toxic metals. And also, again, there's a lot of work and uncertainty about the role of infections. One study using antibiotics in ALS unfortunately showed a worsening, but I would probably consider antivirals in the ALS as well. So the short answer is yes, I would give these for neurodegenerative diseases in general. We currently have a study that we're enrolling people who have Alzheimer's disease, and we're giving the vitamin D and the curcumin as part of that study as well. So the short answer, yes, it's reasonable to do so.
Okay, good. Here's a question about magnesium. They want to know, is there one kind of magnesium that's better than another, and can you use magnesium oil applied topically? Will that do the same job as oral magnesium?
You're going to have to apply. You're going to have to dip in a bathtub with it. It's a pretty pricey way to get the effect. So the topical magnesiums work best if you have a localized pain. So say you have a muscle pain and you want to rub it in over that muscle, so it goes straight down into the muscle and helps in that little area. But when you're talking about nourishing the entire body, the IV is nice, but it's not doable day to day for most people. So basically, 200 to 400 milligrams. I like magnesium glycinates, but really any magnesium besides oxide or hydroxide. Now, there's trade-offs. The magnesium oxide and hydroxide, not as well absorbed, but it's more compact and lower cost than some of the other ones. So there are times that I will use magnesium oxide and hydroxide. But in this situation, I would use ones that are not oxide or hydroxide because they're better absorbed. The other thing that can be very helpful would be an Epsom salt bath, where you take 2 cups of Epsom salts in a tub of hot water and soak. You may not you'll get some skin absorption that way, but you're getting it through the whole skin. It's a lot cheaper than the oil. But more importantly, you're absorbing it right closer to the muscles. I don't want to say right into the muscles, but in effect, that's what you're doing, and you're helping with the muscle relaxation. You just have to make sure, a lot of these people have trouble getting in and out of bathtubs. You want to make sure there's somebody strong enough to make sure they can get safely out of the tub. But for the magnesium in general, before I'm going to use most of the topical oils, I would have people take a bath in Epsom salts and add a few drops of lavender oil to the tub. And while I'm at it, I add a glass of red wine and some dark chocolate and just make a night of it. Yeah.
All right. We also have a question about a new drug that I heard it in the news just in the last 2 weeks. It's a cancer drug called nilotinib that they found is also effective for Parkinson's disease. Do you have any experience with that, or have you had a chance to review any of the news on that?
Not yet, so I don't know.
Okay.
I'd be curious though to look at the effect and to see what the degree of effect is relative to these things we talked about today, and then do the list of side effects and cost. Put those in one column, have side effect, cost, toxicity overall, effectiveness, and have it for the natural things and have it for the chemo agent. I'd be interested to see how they match up. And what I find in general, so the answer is I haven't seen that data yet, and so I don't know. But most often you'll find that these things will have less effect than natural alternatives, be far more toxic, and insanely more expensive. But Cheryl, what did you see in the data? What was the degree of effectiveness?
Well, it's very preliminary, but the way that nilotinib works, it's different than the other drugs that have been used thus far for Parkinson's disease, is that it works on the ability of the cell to remove its own waste. It gets rid of debris within the cell. And as you know, there's certain types of debris that build up in the cell and a variety of neurodegenerative diseases, including Parkinson's disease. So they don't have as much data yet. It's not in wide practice, but it's been the first new drug news in Parkinson's disease in a very long time. So I think that's why there's a lot of excitement about it in the Parkinson's community.
So we're going to have to update the 67 Pontiac and the picture and the slide we had?
It may be if it gets approved for that application. Another question was, someone wanted you to clarify, did you say that levodopa or carbo-levo has a limited time for effective use?
Yes. Basically, the problem with the medications, unlike a blood pressure pill, you take it and you can take it the rest of your life and it continues to work. The levodopa, after several years, often stops working. So, sometimes you have to time it when does a person really need it, because you have a certain number of years. And then it stops working. So that's one of the big problems with it.
Another question is, if you are on levodopa, can you take these supplements along with?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Here's the one thing with the levodopa, and you want to be careful with the B6, and that's why they have the combination of the carbo-levodopa. But for these nutrients, I would take them right along with it, with the medication.
All right, let's see. I'm sorry, we've got so many questions and then also some other things going on here. Trying to weed out which ones are the questions for you. Here's a question that wants to know about topical glutathione. I have seen this as well, topical creams that contain glutathione. Do you believe that that's a good delivery method?
I don't know, but that's not the way I would go. We don't know what the absorption is. Have you seen any data on?
Isn't there? I believe there's a huge issue with oxidation. That
I would imagine.
Yeah, and so you end up with oxidized glutathione instead of active glutathione.
Yeah.
Although
it's like trying to get batteries in your body, and by the time they get in, all the charge is gone.
That's true. That's a very good analogy. But I've also heard of using glutathione topically in cosmetics because it has the ability to lighten the skin, make the skin brighter and lighter. So it's very popular in Japan right now. You're going to probably see it more often in the United States, cosmetics that contain glutathione, but it's a totally different application. It's meant for topical use. It's not to try to increase the systemic amount of active glutathione in the body.
Yep, sublingual and IV is the way to go. I will give glutamine, glycine, cysteine, and vitamin C orally as the next best step to try. In fact, I do all of that together. But the sublingual glutathione is really, outside of the IV, that's the gold standard.
Here's a person who wants to know about food sources of glutathione.
No, it's made by human beings, so you have to eat other human beings if you want to get it.
And it would be oxidized if you tried to do that.
Yeah, and you'd get pretty beaten up and bloodied if they have a chance, yeah. So much easier to go ahead and get the sublingual, yeah.
Yeah. It says, would you add to the protocol an omega-3 fatty acid and a multivitamin?
Absolutely. For virtually all neurologic disorders, I'm going to go with a good vectorized, basically, for the omega-3s, let me step back a moment with that. Most of the fish oils, and again, the vegetarian sources of omega-3s are much less efficient, are mostly not omega-3s. They may as well be eating soybean oil. And those other oils, in addition to not being helpful, can get rancid and oxidized, and oxidation is really a problem in this disease. So for most everything where I'm using the omega-3s, I'm going to use a pure omega-3 that doesn't have the unnecessary other oils in it, and one that has the phospholipids and is basically bioidentical. That way you take one pill instead of 8 a day. I just finished a textbook chapter for the main nutrition textbook used in universities or nutrition students. It was on psychiatric and neurologic disorders, and basically what I said is for all of those, they need a good vectorized omega-3. And I'm going to say that here as well. I think as part of the background support, it's a very good thing to have to help with brain function. I do like a multivitamin. I like the vitamin powders. Otherwise, people are taking 35, 40 pills or more to get what's in the one drink. And the vitamin powders will have the B vitamins. It'll have the magnesium, the amino acids. It just has everything else in it. My only caution is that the ones that I use would have 45 milligrams of B6. Even with the carbidopa, I like not to overdo it. If the person's not on the L-dopa, absolutely, I would use the vitamin powder in the background. Otherwise, I'd probably use a multivitamin with a lower level of B6 just to be on the safe side.
Interesting. They have one more question here. has to do with vitamin D status, and you had talked about our avoidance of sunlight, both through sedentary lifestyles and office jobs, but also in being afraid of sunshine, that it's somehow going to damage us. But they had also read, they said that taking cholesterol-lowering drugs, the so-called statin drugs, when you take away cholesterol, that's one of the raw materials the body uses to make vitamin D, and with so many people on statin drugs, we're robbing the body of the raw materials, and they wanted to know what your take was on that information.
Again, I think the statin drugs are a massive scam for most people. They're life-saving in people who have a history of known heart disease, such as angina, or they've had a heart bypass, and those people, life-saving. For people just with a high cholesterol reading, I think it's, I don't know, scam may not be too strong a word, but but it is critical because it will cause coenzyme Q10 deficiency, and it will also slow the cholesterol cycle, leading to pregnenolone and all the steroid hormones. So I'm not familiar with its role in vitamin D, so I've learned something today. Thank you for whoever made that comment. But in terms of problems with blocking other critical functions, absolutely. I think the statins are grotesquely overused.